I really wanted to get the engine started and running this week. We're pretty much ready to start it. We've hot wired the starter to the battery along with the fuel shutoff solenoid. So I'll kind of show you what we've done in order to get here. The first step is to get underneath the truck and drain all the gas out of the tank by loosening the 19mm bolt. It's always hard to tell how much gas you have in your 80 series because the meter always reads like 5 gallons more than you actually have. So I ended up having like 10 gallons of gas come out, which is not ideal to just have sitting around, but whatever. In the last video, you saw me remove the electronic fuel pump from the tank because we're moving to mechanical injection with the VE pump on this Cummins. I apologize in advance for the mess of this garage and how everything's thrown about, but we got the wiring harness done. I didn't film me cutting all the wires, but I'll show you what you need. This is all that's left after you cut all of the wires that you don't need. What I have is this connector going to the alternator to charge. I have one of my water temp sensors and then another one, which this one is broken on the inside, so I'm waiting for a new connector to come in. That'll go for this sensor. And those will both plumb into that brass fitting I have in the back there. Here are all the connectors that get disconnected. Obviously your OBD2 diagnostics. This is the park neutral safety switch. You have tons of different little connectors. I'm not going to be able to figure out exactly which one's which. There's 6 different injector plugs. Some of them are gray, some of them are brown. O2 sensors, intake air temperature sensors. I'm not sure that that's actually what that is, but what I did was start with the ECU and then trace everything back to the connectors, and obviously you don't need a lot of those connectors, so I just traced it back. You can use a wiring diagram, but I knew that I was just taking a bunch of stuff out, so I would trace it back, cut it, and then thread it through the harness back to the ECU to make sure it's something that I didn't need. This is all the wiring that you don't need, and it is a ton. What you're left with is this big connector that'll go to the transfer case, as well as these 2 white connectors that will go into the cab. These are the 3 gray connectors that'll go to the ECU that would plumb through this area here, and obviously we don't need those. So this will have to get rewrapped, and we're gonna have to figure out our starter and a couple other things. But for the most part, the wiring harness is done. Here's that large wiring harness connector, and this plumbs into your transfer case for all of your vehicle speed sensors and center differential lock buttons and all that good stuff. There is a separate wire that'll run to your starter from here. This is going into your battery. This is that connector that will plumb into your alternator. Of course, it's gonna have to be extended because we're running it this way. Now, this is a bit of a mess. What I've got here is the high mount bracket from Jonesy's, tensioner mount, AC compressor, alternator goes here. We've taken it out and we've replaced our external voltage regulator for the internal Toyota one, so this will plug in right here. We're gonna replace our brushes with a new brush because the ones were a little corroded and actually worn down. The springs aren't working that well, so we'll install a new brush so it charges correctly. This is the part of the swap where everything's kind of a mess, everything's thrown around, there's tons of little things to do, but it's important to stay focused. We're gonna install the body lift next and try and get enough clearance on the firewall and see how our transmission tunnels are working. These are the body lifts, and they're a 1-inch body lift kit. They're a 1-inch aluminum puck with longer hardware and nylock nuts. So this is what we're gonna be installing today. We need to get enough clearance on the firewall for all of our heater hoses and just to have more room in that back area. And we also need to work on our transmission tunnel. I'll show you when I'm under there. So the cruiser's sitting a little bit askew. We've got the body lift installed on one side, and I'll show you how we did it. This is the front body mount, and what we're doing in order to get enough space to put these pucks in is unloosening all the bolts and then jacking up this one side with a jack and a few pieces of wood underneath the rocker panel so that it doesn't dent it. This is the second body mount. It's underneath the driver's side kick panel, and you have to peel up the carpet in order to get in there. It comes with the longer bolts, so we've got that one installed. We've also got this one in the middle, and that's gonna go right behind the driver's seat, so to access that bolt, you need to pull up the carpet as well. This is the fourth body mount, and it's located behind the rear driver. And this is the last one. It's on the back side here. There is a little plastic piece that allows you access. I couldn't get the bolt in through that way, so I'm actually just mounting it upside down so that we can tighten the nut on the inside. We've still got the other side to do, but it's good to leave all the bolts loose so that you can jack it up. Trying to do it as safely as possible so that the entire truck doesn't fall off the areas where they're supposed to mount. Here's the passenger front side underneath the radiator, and we've got the rest to do on this side. But you can already see we're gaining some purchase in the back side here. So we'll start on the passenger side of the vehicle. We have connected the turbo and the exhaust manifold. I've got some new exhaust manifold bolts. The old exhaust manifold bolts that came with this $600 engine were completely rusted out. So I got some new ones on Amazon for like 25 bucks. This is your OEM Toyota 80 series oil pressure sending unit, which will work for your dash. This is the oil turbo feed line, and unfortunately the one I bought cracked and is not working, so we're waiting on a new one to come in. That'll feed up to the top of the turbo here and go on this AN fitting. There's the hot side of the turbo. And for right now, we just have no exhaust flange on the back. I'm really not sure about this exhaust manifold, whether or not it has any cracks. I'm hopeful that it doesn't. This is off the old VE early non-intercooled Dodge W250. There's a broken stud for your water outlet. I went ahead and just deleted my rear heater because it was kind of getting in the way for the install of the block, and I didn't want to damage anything, or furthermore just have a potential failure point if I did nick something when it was in there already. So this will be the water outlet from the cab. This is the water inlet, and then we need to install the whole heater valve metrics up here, but we've done a body lift and there's a lot more room in here. Probably doesn't come through much on camera, but we are looking good on the back part of that firewall. This is the first piece of the water outlet slash AC alternator bracket high mount from Jonesy's or Adventure Vehicles Northwest. I tried assembling it just to make sure I had all the parts. I had an issue with the belt and the tensioner not working correctly. I've since taken them off. I contacted Jonesy's and they said that they might have sent me the wrong belt, and that I also told them that I have the wrong gen fan hub. So we got all that figured out and we have a new one on the way. That's not really required to start the engine anyways. I just kind of wanted to get a little ahead. I had painted the crankshaft pulley black, but I think the contrast of red on black and then the black fasteners looks really nice. We've got our oil fill tube installed with all of the gaskets fastened up to the block. We've got these MPT pipe plugs filling all of our coolant ports. Not that that matters because we don't have any coolant in the engine at the moment. We've got all of our valve cover gaskets installed and bolted down. I pre-oiled all of the rocker arm and pedestal assemblies so that when the engine starts up for the first time, they wouldn't just be dry. We got our intake manifold on along with our injection lines. I'll go over those in just a moment. This is a cheap eBay intake and I really just bought it for mock-up purposes. This was like 40 bucks and I really just wanted to have it so that nothing fell into the intake port there. And then I also wanted to see how much room I was going to have for the hood. At this point, definitely not enough for this particular intake. This was again like 40 bucks and it's pretty cheap and chintzy. It's thin aluminum and I don't really have much confidence in it, so I'll probably end up going with something else. I do like that there's some ports there for all of your little fittings for AN or compression fittings. Currently do have our grid heater installed, but I'm probably not going to run that. It would help maybe up here in northern Idaho on the cold starts, but I'll probably have this plugged in most of the time. If I do take that off, it'll give me the clearance needed to run this cheap eBay intake with the hood, but I'm not sure that I want to sacrifice not having that. So what do you guys think? Comment down below if I should maintain that grid heater. So now we'll get into the fuel side of things. There are 3 different fuel lines coming from the tank. This one left open here, I believe, or at least I'm using it for the charcoal canister purpose, so just a vent. So it's not being used at all. This isn't fuel related, but this again is our brake booster hose going to our vacuum pump. This is the fuel return line and this is the fuel feed line. I found this out the hard way. I was using a vacuum bleeder to try and pull diesel from the tank off this one, and it was just creating vacuum in the tank and just bubbling. So I just plugged it onto a different one and found out that that is indeed the fuel supply line. This is actually one reason I really do like the VE pump for this swap, because this whole area gets really congested with all of your fuel, power steering, power lines. Well, not power lines, but your electricity anyways. So here we have our lift pump. Coming from the tank is our fuel feed line going into the lift pump, and then there's a hard line coming up here to a banjo bolt. And this is on the fuel filter housing area. I don't know what you call this whole complex, but there's another banjo bolt right here that has a 10 millimeter bolt inside it, and that is the bleed line. So there's a little valve or a little diaphragm in here, and you push down and it fed a bunch of diesel into the system until you get a steady drip out of that 10 millimeter bolt. If I can get the camera to focus, there we go. And then that fuel line supplies into your VE pump here. This is an AFC reference line or some sort of boost reference line. I forget exactly what this is called, but that needs to be connected to the intake. And then just under the back of the AFC housing, we have our fuel return line. We've also tightened down all of our injector feed lines from the back of the VE rotary assembly. Took a little while to find the right diagram. It's kind of funky the way this thing connects. But all the injector lines are hooked up to the correct injectors, and they kind of finger or thread through all the valve covers. It isn't really that difficult to get this wrong, but refer to the diagram online. There's one main picture that people have that'll be the one to trust. So as I was saying, once you have that bled out of that screw there and you're getting just diesel and not air, you'll start pumping diesel into these injection lines. We've also wired our starter with a little spade connector that we're using to start the engine with just a hot wire and then a positive wire coming to the battery terminal here. We've ground our battery with too long of a cable. We'll have to shorten that, but right to the block. This is some 2-gauge wiring, and it should be relatively thick as this Cummins starter is going to draw a lot of amperage. This battery is only rated for 600 cold cranking amps, so really not enough for this application, but I think it'll be able to get it running for the time being. I wanted to check my fuel shutoff solenoid to make sure that it was clicking, so I went ahead and attached a small wire with a spade connector to the back portion of this fuel shutoff solenoid, and you can hear it click. So we know that the fuel shutoff solenoid is working and the plunger is up when it's connected to that hot line. And I did this off camera. First of all, I didn't want to get any diesel on my camera, but basically what I did was I just tapped the starter wire to the positive terminal, then started to see diesel come out of each of the injector ports with them tightened but still a little loose, and you'll start to see streams of diesel come up. I did this once, and then I tried to start the engine, and I wasn't getting any fuel to basically to the exhaust. I didn't see any white smoke, and I knew from rebuilding this that I should have tons of white smoke. So I was like, what's going on? Then I looked up online, and it pretty much just said that I probably had air in my system. So I bled it again, and I saw a bunch of bubbles come out of these orifices here on the top part of this 17 millimeter nut. And then when I kept cranking it over and getting all the air out and just saw diesel, then I reattached them all and then started it, and it did start. Well, now that we have our fuel injection system bled correctly, we have the starter and all of our wiring, well, the 2 wires really that are required to start this engine connected, I'll go ahead and jump right to the footage of starting it for the first time. All right, so now we have proof of concept. We know that the engine is running. It's not running great because we don't have the intercooler system hooked up. We might need to fine tune a few things once we get the transmission in and get the intercooler piping set up. But we know that we've set top dead center correctly. We have good timing, we have fuel, and we have a lot of smoke. Mostly from a lot of the engine oil that was used during the assembly process, the assembly lube, and all of the other stuff that we have from assembly. So next is going to be assembling the intercooler piping, putting back the front fascia, cooling system, etc. And then we can start looking at our transmission and transfer case. So yeah, guys, I'm super stoked, got the engine started. That's a huge milestone in this swap, is just to make sure that you assembled the engine correctly, that you didn't set timing wrong, that you didn't, I don't know, torque things down improperly. Now we still have a lot of ground to cover as far as making sure that the engine is running properly once we have the transmission attached. But I'm gonna consider this a huge win for this week. So I will be going much more in depth into the wiring harness as I figure it out, but I didn't wanna go ahead and just cut a bunch of wires, try and plug it in and have everything work and be like, this is the way to do it, guys. I wanna proof of concept it and get all my wiring really, really nice and dialed and figured out, and then I'll make a video separate on the wiring. I know you guys are waiting for that. So if you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next one.